This is Literary Theory and Criticism subject, and I will be having my finals from chapter 6 to 10. Before we begin our examination and study of literary theory, it is important that we define exactly what literary theory is and what is not, identify some of the main characteristics of such, as well as identify some of the key differences between traditional literary criticism and literary theory. Literary criticism refers to the act of interpreting the study and studying literature, while literary theory refers to a particular form of literary criticism in which particular academic, scientific, and philosophical approaches are followed in a systematic fashion while analyzing literary text. There are a lot of literary criticism that we need to know. Some of these are the following. Gender criticism. This type of criticism examines how sexual identity influences the creation and reception of literary works. Gender studies originated during the feminist movement, when critics began investigating and unexamined assumptions around gender in a piece of literature. Feminist critics explored how an author's gender might consciously or unconsciously affect in his or her writing. These critics may also explore how images of men or women in literature might reflect or reject the social norms around gender in a particular society. When we talk about gender, we immediately think of a male and a female, but it's more than that. Gender is embedded so thoroughly in our institutions, our actions, our beliefs, and our desires that it appears to use by us to be completely natural. It is precisely the fact that gender seems self-evident that makes some study of gender interesting. Before we move ahead, there are some common words which we need to identify to avoid misconception. The first is sex. It refers to physical or physiological differences between male, female, and intersex bodies, including both primary sex characteristics like the reproductive system and secondary sex characteristics such as breast and facial hair. Another is gender. It is a term that refers to social or cultural distinctions associated with a given sex at birth. It is generally considered to be socially constructed concept. Another is human sexuality. It refers to personal sexual interest and attraction to others, as well as their capacity to act on erotic experiences and responses. When we say gender theory, it is constantly evolving, and many of those who adopt some form of gender theory frequently change their self-identification. This has given rise to the ideology of genderqueer theory, which is a rebellion against all restrictions on identity, behavior, and sexual activity. The genderqueer claim a right to present themselves as male, female, or neither, and to change their identity at any time and to have sex with persons of either sex. According to Ricky Wolchins, writer of The Genderqueer, Voices from Beyond the Sexual Binary, he says that gender is the new frontier, the place to rebel, to create new individuality and uniqueness, to defy old, tired, outdated social norms, and yes, to occasionally drive their parents and other authority figures crazy. Society is under no obligation to encourage such rebellion. According to Michael Foucault of 1926 and 1984, this is a French thinker who is concerned primarily with the operations of power in society. not power as a property of political structures or the power of rules, generals, etc., but power as expressed in social institutions like the medical professions or the penal system. His history of sexuality was meant to be a genealogy of Western concepts of sexuality, a genealogy tracing changes attitudes through the centuries. Adrienne Rich is a poet of towering reputation and towering rage, whose work, distinguished by an unswerving progressive vision and a dazzling emphatic ferocity, brought the oppression of women and lesbians to the forefront of poetic discourse and kept it there for nearly a half century. Now let's talk about structuralism, poststructuralism, and structuration. Structuralism and poststructuralism have a great deal in common. Poststructuralism retains structuralism emphasis on language and retain the structuralists' belief that all cultural systems can be represented as coded systems of meanings rather than direct transactions with reality. Moreover, many of the individuals commonly associated with poststructuralism, this Foucault, Baudrillard, even Barthes, began as structuralists and moved on the course of their thought of a post-structuralist direction. However, there are some key differences that help us to define the terms, even though we should understand not as strict category but as position along a spectrum. Structuralism has no doubt on the existence of reality that in some material, human, or social economic substratum that lies beneath the ideas, emphasize the coherence of a system that which allows for meaning to be constructed, tend to focus on how systems set limits to what can be thought, have a tendency to be reductive. In other words, they tend to reduce many complicated phenomena to a few key elements that they argue explains everything. Furthermore, it is radically anti-humanist to suggest the power of systems to structure out thought, worldview, sense of self, etc. Nearly all power is handed over to the system to the point of being rather determinist. On the other hand, post-structuralism does doubt the existence of reality, emphasize the extent to which the widely understood difference between ideas and reality as one constructed through discourse. In other words, if there is a reality, it may have no bearing on our sense of truth at all. It emphasizes the incoherence of the system of discourse, or at very least the tensions and ambiguities created by the existence of multiple systems try to keep in focus and differences that are being ignored in carrying out the reduction. These differences suggest great gaps in the system that can be utilized to challenge or even destroy the systems at work. Thus, post-structuralists are not humanist, since they are focused on the ways that language and discourse structures thought. However, they do tend to try to restore some small amount of power or creativity to the subject. Now let's move on to deconstruction. Deconstruction is not synonymous with destruction. However, it is in fact much closer to the original meaning of the word analysis itself, which etymologically means to undo, a virtual synonym for deconstruct. To clear this out, deconstruction is a method of literary analysis that challenges our comfortable assumptions. The pioneers of destruction in poetry are Jacques Derrida, and Friedrich Nietzsche. The impact Jacques Derrida philosophy has on Shakespeare's criticism, which is comparable to the impact a round of fireworks has on the night sky. Explosive, dramatic, even awesome, inspiring, but ultimately ephemeral. In terms of a deconstructive reading, it has something to do. The way of reading which analyzes the specificity of a text critical difference from itself. Rhetorical criticism, on the other hand, is the analysis of a broad range of items related to using language to have an impact on an audience. It is the process of examining something for its fundamentals or underlying nature. The criticism observes units of language and other auxiliary products of speakers or writers to examine the intent as well as the context of a piece of an individual communication to an audience. These are often applied to writing where the author intends to have a certain effect on readers. Rhetoric, in general, is very broadly defined as any aspect of speech or writing that reaches out to an audience. Semiotic literary criticism, on the other hand, according to C. Morris in 1964, it refers to the relationship between a sign, an object, and a meaning. Signs that have three factors that are guided through interpretation. The first is designative aspect, which directs the interpreter to a particular object. Another is appraisive aspects, which highlights object qualities, enabling evaluation. And the third one is the prescriptive aspect, which directs one to respond in specific ways. The greatest contribution of semiotic throws on philosophy, linguistics, sociology, anthropology, and aesthetics. Furthermore, it has also been introduced by Charles Sanders Peirce as semiotics in the end of the 19th century and the semiology by Saussure in his course in general linguistics in 1916. This science, according to them, deals with the study of signs that are not confined to the literary realm, but also to the non-literary, which dress code and so on, and which convey common meanings to the members of a particular culture. Thus, semiotics can be considered one of the larger structure of structuralism itself. As Saussure himself referred to it as larger imaginative province for the study of language. When it comes to the new historicism, this is a theory of literary criticism that suggests literature must be studied and interpreted within the text of both the history of the author and the history of the critic. The theory arose in the 1980s with Stephen Greenblatt as its main proponent and became quite popular in the 1990s. Critics using this approach look at a work and consider other writings that may have inspired it or were inspired by it, as well as the life of the author and how it relates to the text. The approach owes much of this impetus to the work of Michael Foucault, who based his approach both on the theory of the limits of collective cultural knowledge and on his technique of examining a broad array of documents in order to understand the episteme of a particular time. Using Foucault's work as a starting point, New Historicism aims at interpreting a literary text as an expression of or reaction to the power structures of the surrounding society. Another criticism is eco-criticism. It is a study of literature and environment from an interdisciplinary point of view, where all sciences come together to analyze the environment and brainstorm possible solutions for the correction of the contemporary environmental situation. Eco-criticism was officially heralded by the publication of two seminal works, both published in the mid-1990s, the Eco-criticism Reader, which is edited by Cheryl Glotfelty and Harold Fromm, and The Environmental Imagination by Lawrence Buell. It is the youngest of the revisionist movement that have swept the humanities over the past few decades. It was only in the 1990s that it began to gain momentum, first in the US and in the UK, as more and more literary scholars began to ask what their field has to contribute to another understanding of the unfolding environmental crisis. That's all. Thank you and good day.